really, Moscow doesn't have that much more in its tank in this respect. Yes, they can launch some missiles and drones, but their stocks are being depleted at a quicker rate than they can actually build them themselves. Even the Iranian drones that they've been using, it's a finite supply.
Moscow has accused Ukraine of staging its largest ever attack on Russian soil. A wave of drones struck Pskov this morning, setting two military transport planes alight. Meanwhile, the Kremlin has said that Yevgeny Prigozhin's plane may have been downed on purpose, and that's the first explicit acknowledgement he may have been assassinated. Mark Galeotti is a Russia analyst and founder of the Mayak intelligence consultancy. Mark, good evening.
Hello there.
Thanks for joining us. It was a busy night in the skies last night, wasn't it, over both Ukraine and Russia. Drones and missiles involved, the most thrown at Ukraine since the spring, but also Kyiv launched its biggest drone attack on Russia since the war began. Just outline the importance of this, the relevance of this at this stage of the war.
Well, it's interesting precisely because it represents a continuing ratcheting up of the Ukrainian effort to strike deep into Russia. I mean, Pskov is up towards the northwest of the country after all, and one of the reasons why it seems to have been so effectively battered by Ukrainian drones is exactly that it wasn't expecting to be in the firing line, and its air defenses seem to have largely been stripped to defend other places. There were 5 other regions, after all, where the Ukrainians launched drones, and in all of those, they were either shot down or jammed with electronic warfare. And I think what it's clear is the Ukrainians really are trying to do 2 things. One is to strike Russian logistical targets. One of the places they hit, for example, was a fuel depot, in other words, to undermine the war effort, but also precisely to make it clear to Russians that, like it or not, this is a war that is going to touch them as well. So I think this is part of a long-term Ukrainian campaign to raise the costs of the war for Moscow.
Yeah, and they are, deep inside Russian territory with those drone attacks as well. Let's discuss the response from Russia. Russia has vowed that Ukraine will not go unpunished after those drone strikes. What does punishment look like?
Well, to be honest, we've heard this rhetoric so often before. I mean, yes, we can expect that, unfortunately, the Ukrainians will face another night or two of heightened missile and drone attacks, most of which are shot down. But because they tend to be shot down pretty much over the cities that they're targeting, debris continues to represent a problem. And there were 2 Ukrainians killed in the attacks on Kyiv, for example. But the point is, really, Moscow doesn't have that much more in its tank in this respect. Yes, they can launch some missiles and drones, but their stocks are being depleted at a quicker rate than they can actually build them themselves. Even the Iranian drones that they've been using, it's a finite supply. So I think to a large extent, this is Russian rhetoric, not least to try and reassure Russians themselves that the Ukrainians can't get away with this.
Let's talk about Prigozhin. Why are Russia saying out loud that his plane may have been downed on purpose? What's going on there?
I mean, I think this is the classic Russian tactic of what they call infoshum, information noise, which is in some ways you throw out so many different theories, conspiracy theories, speculations, and so forth, to the point where they try and make it so that people don't really know or think they don't know what's actually going on. I mean, we've heard some of the more strident propaganda commentators already beginning to point the finger. Not least, it has to be said, at MI6. I mean, it seems to be whenever anything goes wrong for the Kremlin, Britain is blamed in some way or another. Now we're actually seeing the Kremlin itself inching slightly in that direction. But what's absolutely clear is they haven't made a definite decision to basically blame outsiders, because it's a really difficult balance for them. On the one hand, it might be nice to blame, whether it's the Brits or the Americans or the Ukrainians or whatever. But on the other hand, that would be admitting that whoever the antagonist is has an extraordinary reach that actually can basically bring down a plane which has just been taken off from from one of Moscow's airports. So I think they're still in some ways at that stage of just sort of testing out different lines before they decide what's going to be the official answer to what happened to Prigozhin.
Well, it's always fascinating to hear from you, Mark, and you can often read Mark in the Times as well. Mark Galeotti, Russia analyst and founder of the Mayak Intelligence Consultancy. Good to speak to you. Thanks for being with us.